Hi, let's talk about denotation and connotation. Basically, we're going to talk about why definition is powerful, and it is the beginning of analysis. Whenever you're assigned a text, I would urge you to discuss the denotations, the connotations, and the relationships between the two, particularly if you're confused about where to begin or what to say. Pick a small portion of the text and take the words themselves and talk about what they mean, and then talk about what they can also mean in terms of associations readers have. So what they mean in readers' minds, what they mean because of their placement, and then talk about how the two have relationships. From there, you can go on to tie this to context. This is how you analyze a text. Denotation refers to a dictionary definition. So while it sounds like a big confusing word, basically it just means take words, figure out what they literally mean from the dictionary. This is the denotation of the word ice. See, we even have the phonetic spelling, ice. And we know that it's a noun, and here are all of its definitions. The connotation of a word refers to all the associated images, thoughts, and feelings you have when you think of a word. Connotation tends to refer to what is implied rather than what is strictly said. So when I think of the word ice, I think of all of these things: cold, creepy, alone, freezer, white, blue, hate, pain, danger, sliding. I have 1,000 images and associations with the word ice that aren't necessarily its actual dictionary definition. So when someone says you're on thin ice, they don't just mean, wow, some water has frozen solidly beneath your feet. They also mean, if there were water frozen beneath your feet, it would be slippery. You're in dangerous territory. So the connotation of the phrase, you're on thin ice, basically means you are in danger. Let's apply this to a short poem by Robert Frost. This poem's in the public domain. So, when we look at this poem, we notice first that it only has 3 sentences total. So this seems very easy to analyze, but you're going to find that when you apply denotation and connotation to your what they call applying denotation and connotation to a poem or a text is close reading, and when it's a poem itself, it's usually called an explication. So when you apply these things, you will discover that you have so much to say, even about short texts. So many of my students panic because they wonder about word count. Where am I going to get all those words to fill an analysis? That's easy. Actually, the hard part is sometimes cutting it down to what's strictly significant. When I take the word fire for fire and ice, and I just think, now we know denotation, we can look that up in the dictionary. Fire is a chemical reaction, right? But let's take some facts about fire. We know fire is incredibly destructive. We know it can spread rapidly. It can destroy quickly. For ice, we've done some connotations, but let's look at some denotation facts. Our world has been covered in ice before. We have had, scientifically, ice ages, and we still see the movement and effects of glaciers. You can visit a glacier. You can stand on one. You can see where it's been and where it's going. Now, we know that ice itself is destructive. Water expands when it freezes. That's literally true, scientifically true. Large quantities of ice, thus, tend to break containers. They can crush rock. They can wear away mountains. Let's think of another connotation of ice, and this time let's look at an illusion. Hell in Christian theology, and let's consider Dante's Inferno, that text. In Dante's Inferno, hell has levels that are very hot, much like we think of traditional hell, fiery lava pits and whatnot. It also has areas that are frozen. So here we have a hell in which fire and ice are joined. They are both kind of the worst things that we can expect in an afterlife. They are horrors to human beings. So when we look at fire and ice together, literally, we know that fire burns and fire kills people. It's dangerous. If you have a wildfire or brush fire that rages out of control, you're worried. People might die. Homes will be destroyed. Ice and fire are seen as opposites. They don't tend to exist together, and yet Ice in its own way can burn through frostbite. It's difficult to survive in ice. Symbolically, both fire and ice tend to symbolize hate. Fire tends to symbolize passion, both passion in love and passion in hate. Ice itself tends to symbolize frozen passion, anger, vindictiveness. So when we look at the poem Fire and Ice by Robert Frost, and we're going to do a close reading, so we're going to look at each piece and walk through the poem and look at the denotations and connotations and talk about how the pieces relate to each other. We'll just look at the first sentence. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. So, is this literally true or is this figuratively true? Well, it seems as though, literally, you could say, okay, the earth is going to be consumed by the sun, or there's going to be a big volcano, or something else, there's going to be an explosion, something else could happen scientifically, literally, and our world, as we know it, our civilization could end in fire, much like Pompeii. And we've also had ice ages before, so literally our world could end in fire or ice. And world, what does it symbolize? We'll find that out later. And yet the second sentence says, from what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. So we think about the words desire and fire because they're paired here by rhyming. Desire itself seems to imply that we are talking about people rather than science. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. So here it seems very much a poem about people rather than about a scientific reality. And yet, Robert Frost knows that our brains can hold more than one idea at a time. So the scientific reality and the reality that people themselves, people feel hate, people feel desire, and these are powerful, both operate here. Desire and hate, as you can tell, are positioned very carefully. Desire is positioned right above fire, hate is positioned above ice. These are the two human traits that are associated with fire and ice, and these are the two human traits that Robert Frost associates with the end of the world. He associates them primarily with the end of the world through destruction. So when we do a close reading, we're discussing the significance of each part of a text, the denotations and connotations of words and phrases. And we look at how those relate to each other as the text itself unfolds or progresses. So we go back to our poem and we're trying to decide, okay, what do I write? What do I write? Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. So we identify immediately the world will end as the significant aspect here. What does the world ending mean? Well, it could mean literally our world ending, the end of Earth. It could also mean our civilization, our way of life. When we do our close reading of this poem, we can also call it an explication. When you begin at the beginning of the text and you explain each part and its significance in relation to other parts. So we have just looked at the first part, the first sentence. Now, in the course of this, we have pulled out 5 or 6 things to say about just this first sentence. Think how easy it is to take an explication or to take a close reading and write 500 words about 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 sentences. Close reading itself is valuable for students. It forces you to read carefully and analyze as you read. So when you are picking out these quotations or poems and you're doing your close reading and you're walking through them step by step, you may get frustrated at times. But this is like exercise for your brain. Being forced and forcing yourself to analyze and critique and use very careful language to talk about each part of a text makes you better at argument. It makes you better at analysis. Analysis itself is a critical thinking skill. If you can analyze, you are better able to create, to synthesize. You own the material once you can analyze it because you can pull it apart and you learn how to put it back together again. Now, as I said before, the close reading of a poem is sometimes called an explication. So if you're asked to do a close reading or if you're asked to do an explication, both are essentially the same thing. So how do you begin a close reading? That's easy. Begin at the beginning. Hooray! Finally, simple instructions. So for the Fire and Ice poem, if you have to write about this poem, or if you have to do any close reading of any text, pick out your text. So you can pick a small part of a larger text. As you can tell from this poem, 3 lines can sometimes yield 500 words very easily. So if I'm going to write my explication, I always begin with the author and the text title. It seems unimaginative, but it gives you a good place to start. So begin at the beginning. Here's the author and here's the text title. Robert Frost's poem Fire and Ice begins. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. So I take my quotation, I put it into my first sentence, and I begin immediately by telling the reader what we're talking about and where we're beginning. Now I begin my analysis. This suggests that there is actually a scientific debate about how the world will end. Now I could go forth here. There is a scientific debate, but I could talk about fire and ice literally and figuratively, that fire has destroyed the world before, or at least civilization in different aspects before, that ice has played a part. Now I move on though, in this case I'm writing, maybe I'm in a time situation, and I move on to the next sentence. However, when Frost says, "From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire," now I bring my analysis in. It becomes clear that he is not talking about science, but about people and their passions. Yay, desire and fire and whatnot. So here are the 2 elements of this analysis right now that are my own, that I have brought in. So you can see in white the parts that I've quoted, and you can see in red the parts of my analysis. Now your analysis should always be at least as long as the part that you quote. Often it should be 2 or 3 or 4 times as long. So do not simply trot a quote out and plop it into a text and expect that to be enough. You have to talk about why it's important. You have to pick out different elements and explain their significance. Now, if I want to improve this, I would immediately look at this pronoun. It becomes clear. Because here I'm trying to trot out some evidence and say, haha, here's my conclusion, but I have not discussed why that's my conclusion. So let's replace it becomes clear with, Frost's use of the word desire makes it clear. This is much better. So that's the difference between a B and an A or a C and an A. This trotting forth the evidence and just saying, here's the connection, versus specifically identifying why. So when I go back and look at this, here is the beginning of my analysis. Robert Frost's poem Fire and Ice begins. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. This suggests that there is actually a scientific debate about how the world will end. Let's say I want to add to this. Literally, fire and ice have destroyed the world at different periods in history. So I can add more information and make this more significant. You can do this too. Let's add some more. If the world refers to civilization, then think of Pompeii and its destruction by the volcano Mount Vesuvius. So literally we have had times where the world has ended in fire, where that civilization died in just a short period of time. We find it years later, but those people are gone. Their world stopped when they were covered in ash and they died with all those horrible poison gases. So fire killed that civilization. Now I can add on and add my glacier point. Glaciers have covered large parts of the world in different ice ages, destroying habitats and species. So here we have another point. So it might seem as if Frost is beginning this poem by discussing the denotations of this world, of these words. Now I want to add some more, so I'm just writing. The human race has seen different periods of civilization and with both fire and ice. So the association of these two with the end of the world is not shockingly new. So here's another thing that I've tossed in. Now, I want to contrast that with my next point. Here's my original point. It might seem as if Frost is beginning this poem by discussing the denotations of these words. However, now that's a transition, and that alerts the reader that we are changing our focus. When Frost says, "From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire," Frost's use of the word desire makes it clear that he's not talking about science, but about people and their passions. So here I've provided a lot of data about ways the world, literally has ended for different civilizations. Now I'm moving it to people. In white, I add another sentence. Desire and passion are often depicted as a flame or fire. So here we have the symbolism. We bring that in and we associate it with fire. Our next sentence, just like a fire can destroy a forest, though, desire can destroy lives. So we are taking each point to its natural conclusion. Desire this powerful is usually seen in the Western world as a sin. Ha! Here's another sentence that we tack on here, and we get into this idea of sin and passion and fire as destructive. Now let's look at the yellow part. Here's where I bring in other sources. Often students say, how do I bring other sources into a text? Well, if you begin with a close reading, and a close reading usually means you don't move outside the boundaries of the text, but you later want to turn it into a research paper, then there are natural ways to pull in your other texts. Look at what you have. If we've said that in the Western world desire is symbolically seen as a sin, that flame is seen as negative, then let's pull in something from, since the Western world is founded on Christianity, basically, let's pull in something from the Bible. As Colossians 3:5 instructs Christians, "Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." Okay, so we've brought in the Bible. Now, you don't have to use the Bible to bring in other texts. You don't have to go to the Bible every time. It's a good work when you're making an argument about sin or Christianity or some historical versions, but you can bring in other texts this way too. You could bring in scientific texts when you argue about the end of the world. This is an example about how to bring in these texts. So I have highlighted those points, those keywords basically, that tie to that fire and ice and desire connection in the poem. You don't have to highlight them in your text. Obviously, I'm doing this to allow you to follow what is interesting about each part that I put into this piece of writing. The next sentence that I might use is, "These earthly passions are such powerful forces that they equal idolatry." See how the idolatry is in red? Worshipping an idol instead of God. So wow, desire is tantamount to worshiping, something other than your God. It's turning away from God. It is one of the worst sins. Now let's look at an Eastern religion. Since we're talking about the whole world, in Buddhism, desire is also one of the worst aspects of humans. For desire and ignorance lie at the root of suffering. By desire, Buddhists refer to craving pleasure, material goods, and immorality, all of which are wants that can never be satisfied. As a result, desiring them can only bring suffering. So here we have a connection to the Eastern world. So we talked about the Western world, now we're talking about the Eastern world. So in some ways, you can say desire, if desire is equal to fire in Frost's poem, then across the world, different religions, different people see desire as an end to their civilization, as destructive. Here's my conclusion. So in both of these religions, desire is powerful. One of the most great sources, or the greatest would be better here, sources of human suffering. Now, you just keep writing. You've only looked at a small portion of this poem. So when you're analyzing something, you just take each part and you just keep writing. And when you do the research paper, you make associations and you make interesting associations. You do research and your writing will change as you write. Just keep writing and thinking. Move from the beginning to the end. So I will now tell you Theodore Sturgeon's revelation, and he's an excellent science fiction writer if you didn't know him. He basically said 90% of everything is crap. So, here's the lesson you should take from Theodore Sturgeon's revelation. If 90% of everything is crap, then I need to sit down and write some crap to get to the 10% that's good. So obviously, I'll just keep revising until my paper works. So my lesson for you is, close reading, analysis is often frustrating, and sometimes you feel like you don't know what you're doing. But move from the beginning to the end, look up the words you don't know, talk about the connotations you associate with the words, and keep writing so that you can get to the really good part of your analysis that will be there. Most people who act like analysis comes easily are lying. Analysis is a skill, and it takes time to develop that skill. So sit down, take a little bit of a text, and start talking about it. You have to start. Again, just keep writing and thinking, move from the beginning to the end, and that's when you stop. You've just been watching Victoria McCready. Thank you.